Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Julie Mulvihill, and I'm the Executive Director of Humanities Kansas. And welcome to the Big Idea and happy National Poetry Month. We are really excited for today. You're in for just a real treat this month, as our Big Idea is a tribute to both poetry and the 70th anniversary of the Brown v. Board of Education landmark Supreme Court decision. So our thanks today to the Topeka Community Foundation for supporting today's event. They were happy to do so under both occasions. So to start off, I'd like to introduce Dr. Valerie Mendoza, who's the host of The Big Idea. Dr. Mendoza is a Topeka native. She received her PhD in history from the University of California, Berkeley. Now, a lot of you probably already know Dr. Mendoza because Valerie is busier than almost anyone that I know with all of the projects that she is working on, both as a professional in her career as well as a public historian. She works in the public humanities where her research focuses primarily on the history of the Latinx community in Kansas as well as the broader Midwest. Valerie has served as a consultant to the Kansas Historical Society, to the Kansas Creative Arts Industries Commission, the National Folklife Network, and many, many other impressive organizations. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mendoza to lead today's conversation. Please remember that this is meant to be a discussion, so put your comments and questions in the chat box or in the Q&A, whichever you prefer. We'll be monitoring that throughout today's event. So Valerie, take it away.
Thank you, Julie. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our special guest this month, Michael Kleber-Diggs. So Michael is a 2023 to 2025 Jerome Hill Artist Fellow in Literature. He's a poet, an essayist, a literary critic, and an arts educator. His debut poetry collection, Worldly Things, won many, many awards, among them the Max Ritvo Poetry Prize, the 2022 Hefner Heights Kansas Book Award in Poetry, the 2022 Falcones Poetry Prize, the 2021 Poetry Center Book Award, and was a finalist for the 2022 Minnesota Book Award. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that introduction. And let me start by saying I was eligible for the Kansas Book Award and the Minnesota Book Award in a way that I think informs a lot about who I am. I'm a Kansan who calls Minnesota home, but I'll never not be a Kansan. So I'm always delighted when I get an opportunity to be connected to the arts and cultural community in Kansas and to be in conversation with people like you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And that is a perfect segue to my first question, because you're coming to us from Minnesota, but you grew up in Wichita. So can you tell us a little bit about that growing up?
Sure. I was born in Kansas City. My family moved to Wichita when my twin brother and I were 8, and we stayed there through high school. And then I went to college in Lawrence, Kansas, and moved to the Twin Cities to go to law school after that, and the rest is history. But that time in Kansas, both in Kansas City and in Wichita, was idyllic for me in many ways. As I think back on it now and thinking about it in preparation for our conversation, I'm aware that a lot of that was affected by the legacy of Brown versus the Board of Education. I went to a relatively diverse elementary school in Kansas City called Silver City. In Wichita, after a short stint, so we started at an alternative elementary school called Isley Elementary School. Both of those spaces were, I think, a couple decades into the effort to desegregate. And as I look back on it now, these are not thoughts that I had when I was growing up. I see some intention around trying to make sure the schools that I attended were diverse in ways that suggested that a majority of the communities who were sending students to those schools were supportive of that effort to bring a lot of different kinds of people together. I want to take a moment to say I know that my mom was intentional in her decisions about the kind of communities that we moved in, and that her intentionality allowed a lot of what emerged or appeared to me to be the kind of community that we're striving for. It wasn't perfect. It was in progress, but I look back on that time, on the schools that I attended, the kinds of students who were there with me, with fondness.
Yeah. I appreciate that shout out to your mom and parents in general, because when we do talk about, our schooling and growing up, it's the teachers, it's the school districts, it's more systemic. But you're right that it is very personal, right? It's
Yeah,
family oriented,
right.
community oriented as well. So,
I absolutely agree. And I think to the extent that our efforts toward truly desegregated communities will be successful, and in my mind, they're still continuing. It's fits and starts, advances and setbacks. It's going to be parents who drive it. If you're talking about schools, parents who make decisions about where their children go to school, parents who make decisions to invest their time and resources and energy in making those schools successful places. That's what's going to be a determining factor for all of those things.
yeah, absolutely. So tell us, what inspired you to be a writer? What or who? And what did your journey look like from the beginning to where you are now, a multiple award winner?
Well, um, the real answer is I don't know, but I can tell you about the process. The first time I wrote something that was not assigned to me, I was in fourth grade, and I remember enjoying that and liking it. I wrote a story that was, I'm going to call it a copy, but it might have been outright theft of a story called Ralph and a Motorcycle by Beverly Cleary. And I just did it at home, probably on a rainy Saturday, and I loved doing it. And that began for me what really ended up being a lifetime of writing, of feeling a desire to tell a story or to try a story, and then doing it throughout my life, beginning in that moment, all the way through school, every school that I attended. And after that, in my professional life, I always had things that I was writing. Initially, it was short stories. And then in 1999, I started to fall in love with poetry, taking workshops in that, learning it intentionally, um, trying to find a voice for myself in poetry, reading lots of poetry, and that, of course, just kind of took my beginning and my fascination and gave it a very specific place to grow and blossom and get out of control.
Yeah. So where in that did that law school stint happen? Because I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, so I went right from undergrad to law school, right from the University of Kansas to the University of Minnesota, and I loved law school, loved it. I didn't really love being an attorney. I was good at it in some ways and terrible at it in other ways. And um, I think really deep down, um, I had a job that I could do, but not a job that I could love. And that might have been endurable, except that I had this thing that I loved to do that could also be a profession. And I couldn't think of a way really to do it. But over a long period of time, I found myself able to transition from a life that was mostly focused on law things or law adjacent things to a life that was focused on writing and teaching and spending time in creative spaces.
Well, we're glad you did. So can you treat us with one of your poems before we go on to
Sure.
more questions?
Sure. This is a poem that I wrote for a chapbook that Humanities Kansas published, I think in 2021, somewhere around there. And it was really a collection gathered around birds that are native to or commonly found in Kansas. And my poem is called Ode to the House Sparrow, and it's really a love letter to the state of Kansas. The poem itself is shaped like Kansas. So as I was thinking about our conversation today and the possibility that I might be asked to read a poem, I decided that this one would be a fun one to start with. Ode to the house sparrow, to every common thing, to bodies so plain they might remain unseen, to all beauty which reveals itself over time, rewards your faithful attention, to city creatures and country creatures, to society, to joy available in prattle and chatter, to every being refusing discouraging words, reminding us we're never alone, to everything that sings because it's happy, that sings because it's free, to free state songs, to the soundtrack of every day, always a chorus, to extracting every abundance the land offers, to maximizing each seed, every crumb, to neighborly ways and easy association with passersby. In winter, sometimes you can find a family of house sparrows thriving, warm somehow in a leafless bush. You might walk right by. You might be distracted by some shiny thing. You might stop to visit, join them in harmony, gay like them, knowing they will persist around you, their breasts rich, brown, gold, limestone, shale, black, like healthy soil beneath a ready field of wheat, ripe sorghum, plum for harvest. There will always be objects of more obvious splendor, but consider the moon in reaping season, all red that promises to leave. See ecstasy expanded in a fleeting flush of color. Offer instead your earnest praise to all things capable of grandeur that choose to endure in the background. Send out their beauty in plain song.
Wow, I love that. God, just word choice, sound, and then thinking about Kansas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. Yes, snap, snap, snap. So, what writers have influenced your work?
Yeah. So this is easy. Thinking about this is super easy. Um, so and I think a lot about Kansas writers. Like if I were to pick one poet whose work just always dazzles me and enchants me and inspires me in my own writing, I would pick Gwendolyn Brooks. And Gwendolyn was born in Topeka, but left very young for Chicago. But you know what? She's a Kansan. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Yep. It's that's where you were born. So you're a Kansan. And I really love her work. I also really love and admire the work of another Topekan, Kevin Young. I could go on and on. Our state has such a rich literary history, but those two writers for sure are writers I think about a lot. My voice in poetry is different from both of them. I'm probably closer to Gwendolyn in terms of sentences and narrative than I am to Kevin, who has a style that is excellent for its compression and efficiency and sonic virtue. But those are two poets who come to mind when I think about influences and um, wanting to feel in conversation with poets who are part of Kansas's legacy.
I love that, being in conversation with other poets. I never thought about it like that. So as you were describing, the style of Brooks and the style of Young and your style, how how did your just the style develop? Like, was that just was it something that kind of changed over time, or have you been pretty consistent in the way you write your poems in particular?
Oh, I love that question. So I think as a writer, and I'm for much of the time I was self-trained and autodidact. I didn't begin writing creative writing on my own as part of a formal educational process. And my educational path was not a master's in fine arts, it was a Juris Doctorate. And so I learned to write in the community. And before that, I just learned to write as a reader. I would read things, I would be inspired by them. They would inform the kind of writing that I made, which is a form of saying that for me, my early art was imitation. which is not uncommon. Like a lot of artists begin by like, I really love Smoke on the Water, and I just got a guitar, so I'm going to learn to play Smoke on the Water. And then it kind of evolves from there. So for me, the process of getting a sense for my voice in poetry, and I want to pause here to say ever evolving, always changing as I read, as I practice. I see new possibilities, and I also find myself interested in new things. It's gradual, but it's also perceptible. Um, a part of finding my voice in poetry was mostly letting go,
Mm.
believing that my voice is sufficient, trusting it, um, understanding that it is influenced by, shaped by not only what I read, but by my lived experience, by the voices of the people who are around me in my formative years and the voices of the people who are around me now. And just understanding that my quiet, plaintive poems um, that have, I'm going to bring a third poet into conversation here, kind of a Jane Kenyon quality, that they're okay, that they're sufficient. And that was a process that played out over a number of years and also overlapped a lot with my ability to say, I would like to, I would like to be a writer now, and believe that that was something that could be and would be possible for me.
Yeah. Did especially poets, I think, have such a vulnerability kind of when, right? So like that, what you said, learning to let go and trust your voice, that has to be a huge part of that
Yeah. Yeah.
process. Yeah. Um, so to what extent has your work been influenced by the legacy of the civil rights movement?
Yeah. A lot. It's been made possible by the legacy of the civil rights movement.
Mm.
I think about all the things that I hope to do as a writer. Um, First of all, to be able to claim that identity, to see that as something that's possible for me, to see my work as worthy in the world, and to find a world where it is worthy, to be able to publish work and promote it, to be able to write about things that matter to me without shyness or concern. Um, all of those things are made possible by the legacy of the civil rights movement. I mean, I think about all my mother's 84. She lives 2.1 miles away from my house, according to Google. And I think about what her life, all the changes that she's seen in her lifetime, all of it, most of it, the result of intentional, concerted, lengthy campaigns and efforts by people who wanted to see a different world. And all the things that that allowed for me, including education, access to a quality education. Um, and I definitely understand that. And listen, to be clear, for every decade of American history, there's been a Black writer. Our ability to see them or acknowledge them is the thing that has probably changed the most. But Phyllis Wheatley was writing at a time when the law in America was not at all favorable to the possibility of a woman writing, let alone a Black woman. And if we look at the 1920s when Claude McKay and Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston were writing, they were not writing into a welcoming world, not a welcoming publishing world, not a welcoming reading world. And they made dazzling and impactful and important work. But that also is a part of the civil rights movement, those voices that fought for and found a way forward. And um, those early writers, all those people who campaigned all over the United States for changes in laws and changes in hearts, they all make the work of artists of color, queer artists, um, possible. So it's had a huge impact on my life, even especially because it allows me to see myself as worthy.
Absolutely. Can you read us another one of your poems, please?
Sure. Um, this is a poem I am working on right now, so kind of a newish one. I was I was telling my wife that I think it's probably how I was socialized. I'm going to say it was how I was socialized, but I'm a person who can probably, if you show me pictures, name 10,000 athletes, and I don't know the names of many flowers or many trees. And I was just kind of reflecting on that. And we have a tree that I love a lot. This is a poem called It's a Pagoda Dogwood. And the title is in quotations because it's a bit of dialogue that I hope will come through in the poem. It's a pagoda dogwood. In our backyard, there lives a short, broad tree, unfurling each April into vibrant green, then blooming and blazing, rich red in summer, pink and orange, then rust to light brown every single fall. Often in winter, fat snowflakes arrive so slowly and land so gently, they coat each limb like down. Perhaps I'm too content to love our tree as just our tree to commit to remembering. Perhaps I'm drawn to other things or so adrift I tend to forget because once a year or so, it seems, I find I ask, what's that tree called again? The one in our backyard. Always her answer comes, always soft like raindrops rolling off the leaves of trees in the wake of an autumn storm. But still, loving our tree for so many days, for so many years, one would think I could commit its kind to memory. And someday I will. But right now, every morning when the sun comes up, I go visit. I can tell its brown buds have elongated a bit more. Soon they will open, and then some wrens and cardinals will call.
Beautiful. I love
They-
that. It's perfect for this time of year too.
Yeah. I also do think now that I've written a poem with the kind of tree, and I'll probably remember what it's called now,
Uh-huh,
at least for a while.
uh-huh. So, your first poetry collection, as I mentioned in my introduction, received numerous accolades. What did you feel when you found out about each of these awards? Because
Um,
it's not every day we win, a prize like that, or our work is acknowledged in such a way.
yeah. So, um, when Worldly Things came out, I was 53 years old. And it is my first book, and it's it represents years of 3 years at least of poems, and then a couple of years of trying to see how those poems were in conversation with each other, what the through line was, whether I could find a narrative from all the things that I was compelled to write about over the course of that time. I had a lot of help. I had so much help from my mentor who I worked with for years, Juliet Patterson, who's um she grew up in Minnesota, was born and raised in Minnesota, but her family is all on her mother's and father's side from Pittsburgh, Kansas. And she's another person who calls Minnesota home, but considers herself a Kansan, even though she was born in Minnesota. And lots of help from friends in the community who are also writers. And I eventually got the book to the point where I really liked it. And um, just that to me felt like a tremendous accomplishment. When I was sending it around, um, I just remember wanting five things. So I was in my 50s and beginning to think about my mortality. I wanted to have a tangible physical object, like as proof of my existence on Earth. I wanted to work with a publisher who made books that I admired, and I really interpreted that broadly. I wasn't trying to find the most exalted publishing house, although I found one that has an impressive and well-earned reputation. I wanted to work with people, with an editor who would help me make the book better. I wanted everyone who worked on the book to be proud of it when we were done. And I wanted to learn about how books were made. I wanted to continue to grow in my education as a writer. And I was standing in my front yard when the call came from Milkweed letting me know that I'd won the Max Frittville Prize and that my book would be published. And I heard the words, but I had a really hard time taking them in. Um, my plans were modest. I was stunned when the call came. I still have the voicemail in my phone. Uh, I haven't deleted it. I haven't listened to it again, but I love knowing that it's there. And I had a sense that I think first that people would see things that I've been working on for a long time, and that conversations that I wanted to have and themes that meant a lot to me would find readers. Um, and I was overwhelmed by that. I still am. And that prize on its own would have been enough for my entire life. And to have other recognition in addition to that um, humbles me even further. I feel grateful every time. I feel lucky every time to be an artist in community with other artists who know and are aware of artists whose work is also worthy, sometimes recognized, sometimes not, that there's a degree of chance in all of this. And whenever fortune smiles on you, it's hard not to feel at least a little bit overwhelmed. I made a promise to myself that I've had no difficulty keeping, and it's basically that I will always stay grateful. Um, if someone sends me an email asking if they can republish a poem, if someone sends me an email asking me if I will send a poem, if someone asks me to come and talk to their book club or their church, I will always see that as a huge thing because for so many years, writing was largely for me a solitary pursuit and one that I loved and one that meant a lot to me. And I am an extrovert by nature. Like you could tell that I know when I joined the call, like just a chatty person. And I love sharing and listening and being in conversation and community with others. And I get a chance to do that. And it's always a big deal to me, always.
Wonderful. Well, we have a bunch of questions piling up for you. So
Okay.
I am just going to get to it. Questions and comments, lots of beautiful comments. I believe the word exquisite was used about your poetry. So our first question, can you recommend some favorite poets working today and why you read them?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Um, so I really love Terrence Hayes. I really love Patricia Smith. I'll put these names in the chat also. There's a poet who I don't know that a lot of people know about her work named Laura Kaziski. I'm a huge fan of her writing. Um, I really like Kevin Young, as I mentioned previously. Ada Limon is amazing. Sun Young Shin here in Minnesota. So many. I mean, there's so many, but that would be a list of poets who I spend a lot of time thinking about and reading and enjoying.
Right. And then another question, when you take a pause and reflect on your body of work, what, if anything, surprises
So um I'm gonna say two things. So the first is uh when my book came out, so there's something that you start to learn about yourself when you take a stack of poems and start to cull it down and think about whether it might be a book and what themes are coming forward. And I'm in that moment, because at the time, I'm writing a poem because I have an idea. And I'm not necessarily thinking I'm going to spend this year writing poems about democracy. I just am, it's more um for years it was just, oh wow, I saw something, I'm going to write about it. I'm captivated by that, I'm going to write about it. And then of course, um your captivations are in accord. Like the things that fascinate me also tell a lot about who I am and what I'm drawn to. And so the first thing is there's that noticing. One of the things, so Worldly Things came out and I started to get requests from people to do things that were related to nature writing. And I just remember like, wait, what are you talking about? I'm not, I'm not a nature writer. And then I reflect back on the things that I've written and how often trees show up. I had a whole bird moment too that I'm kind of still in, like birds show up in a lot of things too. And it's surprising to me in large part because, as I shared, I'm not a comprehensive or intentionally encyclopedically curious about things. Like I hear a bird and I'm like, oh my God, that's a beautiful song. And then I just keep it moving. I'm not a person who's trying to figure out what kind of bird it is most of the time. Or, I definitely know a paper birch when I see one or a pine tree when I see one, but I cannot distinguish a maple and an ash in the middle of summer. And I'm not trying to figure out how to do that. I love trees and they show up a lot. So I think how much my specific world informs my work was one thing. And then separately, um, years ago, one of my friends told me to save the things that I write. And at the time, I thought it was a ridiculous idea. Um, and that's also part of seeing yourself as worthy. And honestly, even if no one ever sees it, there's value in doing it. But I definitely remember, and from time to time, I'll look at things that I wrote very early on and things that I'm writing now, and I'll see two things. The first is the distance that I've traveled, and the second is how much I'm largely still the same.
Hmm.
I know quite a bit more about poetic craft now than I did in 1999. My instincts, I think, have been honed by my learning, my fascinations, the things that I feel drawn to write about, my voice on the page. There's a real consistency there that surprised me.
Yeah, that must be so interesting to go back and look at your early work and compare it to where you are now. So we have another question. For those of us who have not read a poem since high school, which poem would you recommend as a pathway back to poetry?
Okay. So, all right. I have to start by saying when I was in high school, I had two English teachers who changed my life. They were foundational. They're in my book, at the back of my book, because they meant that much to me. Danny Mansky and Claudia Jimenez. And um, we in high school, not with Mr. Umansky or Ms. Jimenez, but we often would have a poetry unit, and we had a poetry unit, and I know we read like Chaucer and Aristophanes and Yeats and Keats and others, and I did not love this poetry unit. And sometimes I think, please don't consider this a reflection on my experience, but I think sometimes poetry is taught as a unit
Mhm.
by people who don't necessarily love poetry, and
Mhm.
that has a big effect. Okay, that has a big effect on how it's experienced by the teachers. Uh, I didn't like poetry that much in high school. I took a poetry class at the University of Kansas, and it was late in the semester that I read for the first time a poem that made me go, hold on just a second, what is happening here? And for me, it was the poem I Sing of Olaf Glad and Big by A.E. Cummings. So you asked, so in other words, high school is not necessarily the best entry point to the poetry party. Like it's the worst door to enter. It can be. It can be. So, what's a poem that might kindle a person's interest in poetry and help them return to it? And I'm going to recommend a simple, elegant, straightforward, beautiful poem by Tracy K. Smith called Bee on a Sill. Like bumblebee on a windowsill, bee on a sill. And if you'll permit me to do it, I'll share it with you.
Absolutely.
Bee on a Sill by Tracy K. Smith submits to its own weight, the bulb of itself too full, too weak, or too wise to lift and go. And something blunt in me remembers the old charade about putting a thing out of its misery. For it, for me, sleep be deep and easy, Hive, heave, give, grieve, then rise when you're ready from your soul's hard floor to sweet work or some war. And I'll add one other recommendation, and it's a poem called The Blue Bowl by a poet named Jane Kenyon.
Okay, thank you so much. So we've been talking a lot about your poetry, which is National Poetry Month, but you're also an essayist and a literary critic.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite genre to write about or to write in?
Uh, my favorite genre to write in is poetry. I think I'm more comfortable and feel more natural in the essay. Um, I feel like the expression of myself is more organic in that genre. In poetry, I'm a relentless tinkerer, and in essay, I'm largely a conversationalist. And the voices are similar and also distinct. Um, but yeah, I think that's how I would express it. I love both. If I had to just only do one, for sure, it would be poetry because it's a place where I think my non-neurotypical brain finds a kind of focus and clarity and just like channeling that is unsurpassed in any other thing that I do.
Nice. Well, can you read us one more?
Sure. So this is a poem from Worldly Things, toward the end of the book, called The Grove. It's one that I like to read a lot, but it's also one that I wanted to read today, thinking about Brown v. Board of Education, thinking about its legacy, thinking about the higher goals behind that effort, which of course were equality and equity and fairness, but also community. At the heart of the case was this desire to figure out how we can be together in community, be together at schools, in parks, and in other places. And in my own work, the themes I think I return to the most are intimacy, community, and empathy. And I think that those three themes are distinct and also very closely related. I refer to them as not even close cousins, they're like triplets.
Mm.
It's all, I think, the work of trying to understand how we can truly coexist and see each other and extend to each other grace and care. And so this is a poem that I started off just wanting to be about trees. In this case, trees riding the bus. That was the idea that got me into the poem. Like, what if trees could ride the bus? And then ended up kind of arcing back toward the things that I write about all the time. And this is called The Grove. Planted here as we are, see how we want to bow and sway with the motion of earth and sky. Feel how desire vibrates within us as our branches fan out, promise entanglements, rarely touch. Here are sweet rustlings. If only we could know how twisted up our roots are, we might make vast shelter together. Cooler places, verdant spaces, more sustaining air. But we are strange trees, reluctant in this forest. We oak and ash, we pine, the same, not different. All of us reach toward star and cloud. All of us want our share of light, just enough rainfall.
Wow. That is beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, yeah. Uh, somebody said that that's one of their favorite poems of yours. So yes, thank you so much for sharing it. Um, what is next for you?
Uh, so I'm writing poems now as I wrote poems before. I am captivated by a particular thing, and then I write about it. And I almost know in the moment that it happens, I'm going to write a poem about that. And so I've started to gather poems that the difference between what I think is shaping up toward a second book and my first book is that as I'm writing, I'm seeing the connections. Um, and the thing that I'm writing about the most right now is family, and my family in particular, and my experience as a parent to a child who was in our home, and now a parent to a child who's not in our home, who's off on her own. And we're still parenting, but we're parenting differently. And having her leave for college and graduate from college and take up residency somewhere, I think else has made me nostalgic for and reflective on the time that we shared together in our house. And that's showing up a lot in my writing. And then at the same time, in the background of that, there's all these tensions that are so present in our world right now. And so I'm just thinking about family and external forces that exert pressure on family life. I'm also writing a book about swimming. I love to swim. I'm a lifelong swimmer. I also am in many ways not a good swimmer. Like I know people who swim 4 times a week, every week, and have their entire life, and I'm not that kind of person. And then um, in the course of returning to swimming after some time away after the pandemic, I found that I really just wanted to write about it. Loving a thing that's complicated, loving a thing that is challenging. Swimming is a place where I feel conspicuously Black in a way that's not always pleasant. Where my size, I'm a large-bodied person, is a source of vulnerability and discomfort. And what I figured out is that I don't love to go swimming, but I love to swim. And I wanted to spend some time on that. And initially I thought it would be a single essay. Sorry, I've got some background noise. I hope it's not too disruptive. I thought it would be a single essay, but it started to kind of show up as a book length project. And so I've been writing a memoir about my life in swimming that also thinks about my mom's experience learning to swim in the 1940s in Wichita at McKinley Park, now McAdams Park, and my father's experience growing up in Boston, Massachusetts, within a mile and a half of 3 pools, but not being able to swim in any of them and never learning to swim. And just thinking about swimming as a place of importance in American history and in my family history and in my life. So that's the other thing I'm working on. Kind of 2 projects at the same time.
Wow. Oh, those sound wonderful. And thank you for giving us something to look forward to. So appreciated this conversation. You have multiple comments in the chat. Your word choices are to die for. So happy National Poetry Month, everyone. I'm going to turn it back over to Julie.
Well, I hate to come back on the screen because I know that means that the program is about to come to an end. And Michael, you just transfixed us with your stories and your poems. And that's exactly right. Your word choice is to die for and exquisite in every single way. So thank you for sharing your talents, your time, for being so generous and being so open about your thoughts and your feelings and your experiences. I know it's one thing to write them down in a poem, and it's another thing, right? To
Yeah.
talk about them, to verbalize them, to share them with the world. So thank you for that. And thank you to Valerie for navigating this conversation and just making it feel so comfortable, like all of us who were watching had been invited into this very intimate moment. So thank you to both of you. And I want to thank our people who registered and who are here today. I have not seen the chat box on fire as much as I have today, so we know that this struck a chord. So thank you to everybody who's on the Zoom call with us. Now, for those of you who can, I want you to save the date Our next big idea is on May 10th at noon, and we'll be talking about the power of photography in the civil rights era with photographer Ann Dean. And I know you won't want to miss that as well if you are a big idea junkie. So you can register now if you want to, if you just go to humanitieskansas.org. And otherwise, I just want to wish everyone a really great and happy day and happy National Poetry Month to everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Valerie, thank you so much.